Hi class, welcome to our lectures on attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I really want you to learn a whole lot of things, but some of which is, what are the symptoms of ADHD? How might that change from being a preschooler to an adolescent? And what other types of problems, what other comorbidities accompany ADHD in children? I really want us to think about prevalence and how this is a interesting disorder for prevalence rates across the world, and really thinking about causes and treatments for ADHD. So let's start off with the first part. What is ADHD? What are the symptoms that we see? So this is a really old, from the 1845. These poems really discuss both the inattention and the hyperactivity of ADHD. So Johnny head in the air as he trudged along to school. It was always Johnny's rule to be looking at the sky and the clouds that floated by. But what just before him lay and the things in his way Johnny never thought about. So everyone cried out, "Look at little Johnny there, little Johnny head in the air." So this kind of obliviousness and head in the clouds, just kind of looking and not paying attention to the different things that are around him. So that might describe some of those inattentive symptoms. Whereas fidgety Phil, let me see if Philip can be a little gentleman. Let me see if he is able to sit still for once at table. Phil wriggled, giggled, and I declare, swung backward and forward in his chair. Just like any rocking horse, father now is getting cross. So this instead is a child who is having some hyperactivity and really having a hard time with sitting in a chair properly. So this is often used as evidence for us to understand more about how symptoms of inattention and hyperactivity have been going on for many, many years. We need for a diagnosis of ADHD either 6 or more symptoms of inattention or 6 or more symptoms of hyperactivity, impulsivity. You can have a combination of both of these, and that would define the combined type of ADHD, but you just need 6 symptoms of either of these categories. So things in inattention, making careless mistakes, forgetting periods when you're writing your paper, forgetting to add a number when you're doing addition, having trouble sustaining attention. We're not talking about attention to things that are naturally reinforcing, like video games. They do a very good job of giving you reinforcements all the time. Difficulty sustaining attention, for example, while listening to this lecture. If you're having a really hard time just kind of paying attention to what's happening, find your mind drifting off. Having a hard time following through with different types of tasks. So, for example, if you told your child to go upstairs, get your shoes, come back downstairs and put them on, they may have difficulty following through or may forget things, like even finding their shoes. They may become easily distracted throughout that process and instead start playing with their toys upstairs. All of those things kind of are those inattentive symptoms. Hyperactivity on the other side is having that fidgetiness. So fidgety Phil, leaning back in his chair and tipping over, might be running or climbing in inappropriate situations. So thinking everything is a jungle gym. Children are often described as being on the go and being on the go and running around a lot. They may blurt out answers in class without raising their hand, talk excessively. This may be even during quiet times. So still talking while trying to read, for example, or interrupting and intruding on others. Each of us has symptoms of inattention and hyperactivity at times. But children who have ADHD will show persistent levels of inattention or hyperactivity, or both. And these all need to show up before the age of 12. Before in the DSM-4, it used to be the age of 7. But what we're finding out is that some children had the skills to really mask some of these symptoms. So if you're highly intelligent, for example, you might be able to mask the fact that you're not paying attention because, well, you are able to do well and succeed in school. And it wasn't until you got into middle school middle school, that you really realized that organization was an issue and attention. So nowadays we say the criteria is at the age of 12. This is also something that shows up in multiple settings. So not all disorders, so we'll talk about oppositional defiant disorder later. Not all disorders have to be shown in multiple settings. This one does. So you'll see these inattentive and hyperactive symptoms both at school and at home and in different places. This also should be inconsistent with developmental level. So it is developmentally appropriate to have some inattention and fidgetiness in preschool or kindergarten. Many children show those symptoms because it's a new environment and we're not taught how to, sit still in one place until we get into school. So it's developmentally appropriate. However, once this keeps persisting is when we really start to say that this is developmentally inappropriate. So all of our disorders need the distress or dysfunction. In this case, we have to have something like dysfunction in school settings, for example. So I think one of the really interesting parts about ADHD is that it's a wide-ranging disorder that has lots of different symptoms in it. And we classify them into 3 different subtypes. If you have mostly hyperactive impulsive symptoms, you are hyperactive impulsive subtype. If you have both hyperactive and inattentive symptoms, you're combined. And if you just have the inattentive symptoms, then obviously you're the inattentive subtype. So one of the interesting parts is how the prevalence of the subtype changes over time. So if you consider this, what this shows you at the bottom here is that we have the prevalence of ADHD in the population, and this is all from the US. And basically what we find out is that total prevalence is somewhere 10 to 12%, and then goes down to 8, down to 6, depending on age. So it seems like some children might age out of symptoms or compensate for the symptoms that they do have. What we see is that at 3 to 5 years of age, the most commonly occurring ADHD subtype is primarily hyperactive impulsive. So the kids that are running around and being impulsive might do things like accidentally hit another child. When we get a little bit older in school age, we start to see this inattentive subtype be more predominant, or the combined subtype. And then later on, we actually see a lot less children being diagnosed with primarily hyperactive impulsive subtype. And instead, it's more of the inattentive or combined types. So I guess over time, what we see is that there's a decrease in the hyperactive impulsive only subtype and more of an increase in the inattentive only subtype. So we know that we have about 7% of the population in our weird Western cultures, but we might have a slightly lower prevalence in other areas. And part of it might be due to just how much we actually care about these symptoms. So in Western cultures, based on our education system, a lot of our education system is kind of rigid and you should sit and pay attention and learn. And in other cultures, you might actually have it where, learning is by doing rather than in our US culture. Boys are a lot more likely to receive the diagnosis than girls are. And some of this might be due to female productive effects. So some of these disorders or at least for ADHD, it might be that there's something about testosterone or only having XY chromosomes that might be one reason why. We also know that girls are a lot less likely to show things like hyperactive impulsive symptoms. So they're a lot less likely to be identified early on. So we might just miss some of those symptoms. They're more boy-typic or male-typic symptoms. Or we might have girls that are presenting with other types of symptoms. So inattention is a symptom of anxiety, for example. So we might attribute some of those symptoms more to like anxiety symptoms or even something like autism. So I'm going to stop this video here, but what I'd like you to do is watch ADHD and Me, which is on your courses. It should be embedded. Hopefully it'll work out for you. But there are 2 clips there, and one of which is an adult and how he's experienced his symptoms of inattention. And the next is a case study about a child and how the family is kind of dealing with that child's ADHD diagnosis.